Hello and welcome. Today is our webinar on Transport Canada's Notice of Proposed Amendment that was issued in June of 2026. My name is Yifei from AlteX droneHUB. This is a joint initiative between AlteX and DroneVector. It's also part of our ongoing series on Canadian drone regulations. Make sure to check out our YouTube and social media for the other related topics. Our focus today is to understand Transport Canada's most recent proposal, and also more importantly, what these proposed changes mean for our industry. At AlteX and DroneVector, we're approaching this primarily from a professional, civil, and commercial perspective. We believe safe and compliant drone operations is really the key to implementing more complex and advanced drone technologies. But keep in mind that today's drone industry is fairly diverse. People are looking at these proposed changes from many different perspectives. If your primary interest is in other areas such as recreational, public safety, or military operations, we can also direct you to other organizations that focus on those topics. Now, let me start today's topic by emphasizing one important point. The current, what we're looking at are the proposed changes. They have not taken effect. And that's exactly why this discussion is important, because Canada's regulatory process gives us an opportunity to understand the proposals, ask questions, discuss the potential impacts, and provide feedback before the regulations are finalized. So our goal today is not just to go over the NPA. We also want to look at why these proposals matter and what we as a professional community can do to help shape the future regulations. So let's start with a quick overview of today's agenda. We'll start with a timeline of where we are right now in Transport Canada's regulatory process. Then we'll get into the three main proposals in the NPA. After that, we'll recap some of the major milestones in Canadian drone regulations. Next, we'll look at how these proposals could impact our industry and what actions we should take. Before we open it up for Q&A and discussion, we'll also invite some of our DroneVector members to share their perspectives on the proposal. Before we get started, allow me a moment to recognize the effort from our DroneVector team. DroneVector is a non-for-profit, member-based organization. I'm honored to be hosting today's webinar because of the members working behind the scenes. They are the backbone of the research, discussions, and work that help us put resources like today's webinar together. If you're interested in joining DroneVector to fly, connect with other professionals, and be part of the community, book a member tour and come find out more. And lastly, a minute of shameless self-promotion. AlteX droneHUB is our 70-acre tech hub in King City. Come explore drone technologies with us. You can learn, fly, and shop drones all at one place. With that out of the way, let's get into the regulations. Before looking at the proposals, let's quickly understand the standard government regulatory process. It generally starts with an NPA, Notice of Proposed Amendment. This is where Transport Canada puts forward the proposed directions and gathers early-stage industry feedback. The next major stage is Canada Gazette Part 1, or CG1, where the proposed regulatory changes are formally published for public consultation. After reviewing the feedback and making changes, the process eventually moves to Canada Gazette Part 2, or CG2, where the final regulations are published. The important part for us is what happens in between these stages. This is we as industry parties and stakeholders have the opportunity to review, comment, and also help shape what comes next. Right now, we're at the NPA stage, and the current feedback deadline is September 9th, 2026. So this is one of those opportunities for us to take action. Next, let's look at the three main areas in today's proposal. First is remote identification, or remote ID. This is introducing requirements for drones to electronically transmit identification and flight information. Second is community-based organizations, or CBOs. creating a framework for recognized organizations to support certain recreational drone operations. And last one is the designated drone airspace, introducing RPAS-specific airspace, digital geozones, and geo-awareness. Let's go through each of these individually, starting with remote ID, which probably has the most impact to our industry from this round of NPA. So in theory, remote ID allows a drone to electronically transmit identification and location information when it's flying. This addresses a major concern in the current drone operations, which is how do you identify the drone in the air and find the pilot on the ground, especially if you're not part of that operation. So in theory, remote ID gives us a way to see drones in the air, including information such as the make and model, altitude, heading, could even include your remaining battery time. This also tells us where the control signal is coming from. And if that controller is with the pilot, essentially it tells us where the pilot is. So with that in mind, let's see how does remote ID supposed to work. There are two main methods. First is the broadcast remote ID. This is using Wi-Fi or Bluetooth to send information from the RPAS, and then any devices nearby that has app or is capable of receiving such information can see and receive that information. But the limitation here is range, right? In NPA, some areas TC noted that the range could limit to as short as 200 feet, or depending on the drone, some can even go expand into several kilometers. Next method is the network remote ID, which potentially this is solving the range issue, right? So this is basing the drone connecting to a network or internet, 4G or 5G or even satellite. So this can provide a much broader coverage. However, that depends on network availability, which brings us to the reality of 4G and 5G coverage in Canada. Is they're very limited, right, in terms of geography. So many areas simply do not have 4G or 5G coverage. This also brings us to several questions. Currently, Transport Canada is not proposing a specific technology or method. The idea is to establish performance requirements and then allow different technologies to meet them. So with that in mind, this we like the remote ID to solve, that one major problem we just talked about is someone needs to be able to receive the information from remote ID and actually use it. So this brings us to the several questions here. Who sees that information? Who determines if a drone operation is illegal or unsafe? Now, would this create an overwhelming amount of reports? And would this actually create some threats or safety concerns for drone pilots on the ground? So adding a little more from the detailed NPA document, who sees the information? TC is considering allowing the public to receive remote ID data through third-party apps. Who determines if a drone operation is illegal or unsafe? So TC describes the remote ID as an enforcement tool for inspectors, delegated enforcement partners, law enforcement. Now, if you look at these two questions together, right, essentially who should be enforcing and using this information? They should be authorized enforcement officers or partners. However, the public can see or potentially see the information based on the current proposal. So that brings us to the next question is, would this create an overwhelming amount of reports? How would the public know is this operation illegal or unsafe? And finally, would this cause a concern, a safety concern for drone pilots on the ground? Specifically, if you think about there's a major difference between drone pilots and crewed aircraft pilots and also drivers in vehicles, right? If you look at pilots in the airplane, in the air, we can use different, flight tracker and different information to see that airplane information, how high it is, where it's going, how fast it's going. But realistically, a person on the ground, there's nothing really they can do to the pilot in that airplane. Similar to a driver in a car, right? You have a reasonable protection when you're in your vehicle. But drone pilots, most of the time, we are out there operating the drone, and our focus is also on the drone and our control screen or the mission at hand. So that potentially leaves us in a vulnerable position if other people can see where we're located and would they approach and cause safety or conflict concerns. So these are the questions from some of our earlier discussions. Keep these in mind once we get into our discussion period. We'll definitely be interested in hearing more from everyone attending today. Next in the proposal is the community-based organizations. This is creating a regulatory framework to recognize organizations that support recreational pilots, operations under approved operating conditions. For example, this allows certain operations outside of Part 9, but this is only for qualified organizations. Based on information we've seen from TC's information session, this sounds more like tailored to the current MAC Model Aeronautics Association of Canada. And later on, before discussion, we'll also hear some of the perspectives from DV members that have more experience related to MAC. Third in the proposal is the designated drone airspace. This is introducing RPAS-specific airspace, digital geozones, geo-awareness to better manage operating requirements, restrictions, communicate airspace information to drone pilots. So there are several pieces of information in the NPA that talks about how to make it easier for drone pilots to know if there are temporary restrictions or special restrictions. For example, during the FIFA time, right, there were different activities that prevents drone pilots from flying there. Transport Canada also give examples such as, federal prison airspace, for example, national park, or specialty activities that may happen temporarily, forest fire, etc. So definitely it would be nice to have a more geo-based and time-based information for drone pilots to know how to avoid there. And this is, we're talking about outside of your current airspace designation, like the class designation. However, keeping the perspective where we as a drone industry will also want to see some more from the other perspective, which is can drone operations, regular or specialized drone operations, can we also use that geo system to share our information to allow other people to be aware? For example, if this is a regular survey or progress monitoring for a construction site that will happen for 2 to 3 years. If that's recurring information, can that be used and alert other people, either airspace user, right, or other drone pilots to be aware of what's happening there? Or road construction, right? We're familiar with, typically if you drive through a road that's under construction or is closed for different reasons, those are information available to drivers. So similarly is if there are regular drones at work, can that information also be reflected through the system? So that's part of the discussion as well. Now that we understand what is being proposed, I also want to take a quick look back at how drone regulations have developed in Canada. Back in 2012, it's actually when we received our first SFOC. This is when commercial drone operations require SFOC. The processing time can be anywhere between 5 to 40 business days. It's valid for that individual project duration. Then in 2015 is when we saw improved SFOC still for commercial drone operations. The standard processing time is 20 business days, and this can be a blanket coverage for up to 1 year. In 2019 is where we saw a major milestone for regulation update. That's when we saw the release of CARS Part 9, the designated section to RPAS operations. Also the pilot certification process. A lot of the standard operations have now moved to a system-based processing, which really speeds up the process. And also the pilot certificate is no longer just for commercial operations. Now is implemented for all small drone operations. 2025 was the release of Level 1 complex operations. That's the new framework introduced for lower risk BV loss, plus the expanded advanced operations to include medium drones, sheltered operations, and also EV loss operations. Now in 2026, we're looking at the current notice of proposed amendment with proposals on remote identification, community-based organizations, and the designated RPAS airspace. Now, with that recap in mind, let's move to how these proposals can impact our industry. We've summarized the four main areas for us to look at. First is to improve compliance. Remote ID can give us better identification and enforcement tools for legal and safe drone operations. Second is to reduce operational uncertainty, right? Based on the digital airspace information, this can make it clearer for the where and how we can operate, and also the where and how are the other drone pilots or airspace activities are. Next one is to enable more complex operations. Those of you who are familiar with the current Level 1 complex, we're all aware of how restricted the Level 1 complex operations are. But it's really when we start seeing remote ID, geo awareness, right, like what we discussed to improve compliance, reduce operational uncertainty, that's when we can start implementing more complex operations that gives more flexibility and less restrictions as we move further into the BB loss operations. And finally is to build that level of public trust. Over the years, we've received many reports and had conversations from both sides of the table. We had one side of the table, public, bringing legitimate concerns about drones that were invading their privacy. And on the other hand, we also had drone pilots who were operating legally and safely and got into conflict situations because the public believed they were invading their privacy or had other safety concerns. So neither part is helping the industry to move forward, right? But with remote ID, the hope or the goal is really to improve that situation and build more public trust. That way we can really move faster by implementing drone technologies. So with that in mind, let's also talk about what actions we can take as the community. So obviously stay informed, right? So after today's webinar, we're going to release the recorded videos and continue to share updates to help everyone understand the proposals. It's also important to share your feedback. Obviously, connect with us, tell us what you support, what concerns you, what you believe should change. Join group discussions, right? But also be active. Make sure that you actually take part in the official feedback process with Transport Canada, because the more industry effort we have, and a lot of times it's also the discussion process helps us to have better proposals or thoughts about how to resolve certain things. We're very fortunate at this early stage. Nothing is set in stone, and we have a chance to take part in this change. There are many questions that you will see during discussion. We may not have the answers for them right now. But technologies, it's great in a way because we're here to bring solutions, right? We're here to explore and solve them using technologies. So this discussion and interaction process is what's really helping us to find better solutions. And lastly, also share this with your community. Help us to reach more drone pilots, businesses who should understand the proposals and also take part in the process.